Hello and welcome to our class today, How to Write a Killer Resume. We are here to teach you how to write a resume that is going to stand out amongst employers. And I think we'll just dive right in. So everything you need to know about how to write a resume. One of the things that is super important regarding resumes is, and the purpose of a resume is, we'll talk about how to identify the purpose of a resume. We're also going to identify relevant skills for a position, write objective statements relevant to a specific position, and how to produce a strong cover letter. What is a resume? A resume is a 1 or 2 page summary of your education, skills, and experience. Your resume should be brief and concise. The adage, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, is never truer than when you submit your resume, because this is likely the first glimpse of you that employers will get. Make it an impressive one. A great resume can open a door, but an inferior one can just as quickly close it. And this is so true. I'll let you know, I have seen resume after resume after resume. I have experienced this myself. But they also say that a recruiter takes about 7 seconds to look at a resume. So it's super important to make that first good impression, and because you have very little time to make that first good impression. Your resume is you, so make sure it represents you well. Do a good job of portraying who you are. A resume is really important to be able to do that. You have to do that quickly and concisely because, like I said, you only have a few seconds to make a good impression. The 5 Ps of creating a resume. Your resume should be painless, perfect, 1 or 2 pages at most. You should consider the weight of the paper if you're not submitting it electronically. That's kind of old school, but it still happens. A lot of resumes and applications are submitted electronically now, so that isn't as big a concern. But if you are going to submit it physically, make sure you're using quality paper. And position. The position should be specific to what you're applying for. Use keywords from the job description that was presented from the employer, and just make sure that your resume is tailored to that employer or that position. So let's talk about the outline of a resume. What should your resume look like? It should have a heading, an objective. It should outline your education. You should talk about your experience, any leadership or involvement that you've been in, any honors, awards, professional organizations that you are involved in, a little bit about your interests, and potentially some references. At least have those references ready. Here's a good example of a heading for a resume. Your first important piece. Your heading is really an eye catcher, so pay attention to how you're creating your heading. It should be simple, concise. It should have your address, and we'll talk a little bit about all the components of your heading in a minute. The name should be large and bold. You definitely want to have your address. You can abbreviate the state, but make sure you have your complete address. I've been noticing lately, especially with remote positions opening up, that a lot of people aren't necessarily putting their addresses, their full addresses. They're putting the state that they're located in, but they're not putting a physical address. I'm kind of on the fence about how I feel about that. I like to see the physical address. I think it's still the professional thing to do, but I can kind of understand with the workforce changing and the remote positions, why that is happening. But yeah, make sure on a physical resume, especially, you're putting your full address. Your email and phone number should be included on that. And if you have any LinkedIn pages, make sure you include that. Make sure your LinkedIn page obviously is appropriate and professional for for the position that you're applying for. There's a couple different types of resumes. There is the objective versus the profile resume. An objective resume, it's a brief but specific statement outlining the type of employment or exact position one is seeking or applying for. So this is more targeted to specific positions. If you have a specific position that you're applying for, you might want to consider using an objective statement in your beginning statement. And then there is your profile or summary. A profile resume or introductory statement details the strengths, experiences, and interests that you have, any skills that you have to offer that employer. These are often used when it's maybe you're at a job fair or you're covering multiple employers or covering multiple positions. Again, like we talked about, an objective statement, it introduces yourself to the employer. 50% of employers like objective statements, but 50% of them think they're a waste of time. Sorry, we need to go back. Your statement should be short and concise. It should be specific and concise, 1 to 3 sentences max, and try to avoid using a lot of personal pronouns. A good objective statement is seeking a summer externship in a small information technology company to utilize my background and knowledge in IT networking and strengthen security skills. It's very specific and calls out the exact position that you're looking for. So that's an example of a good objective statement. Another example, seeking a quality small IT internship where mentorship is at the forefront in order to strengthen my technical and communication skills while also serving as an asset to clients, coworkers, and the company. And one more good example is to become an integral part of ABC Technology Services, valuing teamwork and providing the highest level of care for the clients you serve. Here's some examples of a profile statement. Detail-oriented IT technician who is proficient in handling complex network problems, including software, mainframes, VPNs, routers, and other physical hardware. Possesses a natural passion for IT, great client service skills, and a readiness to work around the clock. So you can see the difference between the objective statement and the profile statement. The profile statement explains more of who you are as a person and your skills and assets, where the objective statement focuses more on the position or the type of position that you're looking for. This profile statement is also called a summary or a professional summary. It gives a good overview and detail of who you are and what you have to offer, and makes the reader want to learn more about who you are. Another example of a profile statement is goal-oriented IT student with broad experiences in Active Directory, software installs, VPNs, routers, and other physical hardware. Keen insight into managing client relationships, willing to work a flexible schedule, and open to relocation. And one more is energetic professional IT technician, ready for a dynamic position in managed services, gain considerable knowledge through rigorous education, externships, and senior rotations in a large IT firm. Once you have your summary done or your introductory statement, you can move into your education. And it's up to you whether you put your education first or your job skills first. But if you put your education, make sure you just list the degree that you received and the school or college that you went to. And there's not necessarily any need to put specific dates in there. I would just put the date that you graduated or the date that you last attended. You can also include, if you want to, qualifications. This is optional. You can add qualifications under or after education. You can put specific qualifications. Some examples are passion for behavior science, skilled in handling aggression, anxiety, and compulsive behaviors, experience in dental cleanings. And these are just a list of qualifications that shows a summary of your skills and interests. They showcase what makes you stand out, and they make the reader want to see where you gain the skills. These qualifications can easily be altered to fit any position, and you want to make your qualifications reflect the position that you're applying for and what qualifications you have that would help you in that position. Experience. Let's talk a little bit about experience. You want to put the jobs that you have worked at. I would list them chronologically. List experiences chronologically with the most recent first within each category or heading. Use action words and use correct present and past tense. So if you have a job that you used to work at, obviously use your past tense, and any job that you are presently holding, use your present tense for that. Just make it make sense on that timeline. Practices and organizations. Often titles are fairly similar. So if you are moving from organization to organization and those titles are similar with other titles in other organizations, that's okay. But if you have an interesting title, then you might want to switch up your titles and have those bold to stand out. You want to highlight the position that you held. There's no need to necessarily put the entire address of the company or organization you served at. You can list the city or the state, and that should be enough. If you want to list your exact addresses on a separate reference page, you can. Let's go back. Include your dates. Usually you don't have to have super specific dates, but put your dates on the right-hand side of your position. It's usually best on the right side of the resume. This is because the employer is more interested in your titles and companies and duties, not that you worked for 1 summer or 6 months. I often, however, do pay attention to how long somebody has worked somewhere, because it shows a pattern of work history and dedication to a company. So that's something to consider as well. When you're listing your experience, you definitely want to showcase your skills with each position. What did you do? What did you observe? What did you assist with? List what you did in as few but as specific words as possible. You want that employer to really gain an understanding of the full scope of your position and the duties that you held at that position. It'll help them gain an understanding of your experience. You also want to consider listing any volunteer or externships that you were involved in. You don't have to separate out volunteer in a different section unless you want to. Usually many of your experiences are as a volunteer do include externships or internships as well. I get asked a lot if you include a list of all of your jobs. Most of the time, the answer to that is yes. But if it gets to be very long and extensive, if you've switched jobs multiple times, just give a list of the more recent and applicable, like the last 10, 15 years if you have to go back that far, but make sure there's no gaps in between jobs, because an employer wonders, well, they had a job from this time to this time, and then there was a gap here. What happened in that gap? Did they not work? Are they not putting something in there that we should be aware of? Those sorts of things. If you don't want to list all of your employers, you can put a section in there called and title it additional experience, where you can just list your title and the place that you worked and the dates, and it would give a good further synopsis of the places you've worked and in the positions you've held. First of all, you might not have enough space on your resume to list everything. You might have had multiple jobs that you transitioned often, but it's a good way to show strong history of work ethic and can showcase other experiences. If you are involved in any leadership or outside involvement, whether it was through college or through the community, it's always good to list those. It shows an employer, what else you do outside of work and what leadership or volunteer tendencies that you have. Employers want to see this. They expect to see this. You don't always need an explanation of what you did for that organization, but at least list the volunteer and volunteer opportunities that you've been involved in. You can also list any honors, awards, scholarships that you received through high school, college, another job, whatever is appropriate. You always need or probably shouldn't put a long explanation, but they are helpful to bring relevance to the reader. And it helps get to know you a little bit more. Interest. I get often asked, should I put my interests on my resume? Sometimes this is a good thing, but you want to be really careful. Listing a few interests helps explain to the employer who you are and gives you more personal feel. They do show that you have interests outside of your profession and helps form connections. However, depending on what your interests are versus what your employer's interests are, that could bring up some not necessarily conflict, but some questions. And so you just want to be very careful about the interests that you do provide. References are not always a huge thing anymore. I don't see references being provided a lot. I would have references available and just provide it on a separate page. And that way, if your employer does ask for reference, you have that readily available. Those references can be, like I said, on a separate page. Use the same resume heading that you've used for your entire resume. Make it look the same and consistent. You want to have 3 or 4 qualified people, meaning they are professional references, not necessarily friends or family or anything like that. You want somebody who can really speak to your job performance and your character in the workplace. And always make sure you ask them first. A lot of people don't like to get caught off guard when an employer calls them and says, hey, I'm calling about so-and-so. Can you talk to me about their work history or whatever? Make sure you ask them first, and that way they can be prepared. Here's an example of a reference page. Again, you want to use the same consistent heading that you've used throughout your resume. You want to use, like I said, 3 to 4 qualified people. And you just list their name, their profession, where you knew them from, and an email address and a phone number so that your employer can easily get a hold of them. I get a lot of questions about whether or not cover letters are relative anymore, or relevant anymore. I would always have one prepared. I would submit one if you can. Some employers make them mandatory, and definitely make sure when you're applying for a job, you fulfill all the requests for that position. Some positions you don't necessarily need a cover letter. You'll just submit the resume, but some employers do like to see those cover letters and require them. If the employer requires a cover letter, definitely submit it. Don't ignore that request. But if you're applying for a professional position or an administrative position where there's a lot of writing and communication, I would definitely submit that cover letter so they can kind of see an example of how you write, how you formulate your letter, how you communicate in that correspondence. Some basic guidelines for a good cover letter. You want it to be one page, very short, 3 to 4 paragraphs. Use a normal 12-point font and make it, don't use like fancy font or anything. Just make it very simple, basic, business-like. It's a good idea to use business letter block style format just so it's clean and simple and can be easily read. You want to keep that heading on top that is the same throughout your resume. Make sure you have someone proofread before you send your letter. Spelling, grammar, and punctuation errors, they happen all the time. So you want to make sure, A, you're paying attention to those, B, somebody can catch those for you before you send that out. If you're submitting it physically, make sure you put it on a good, thick paper, not cheap printer paper that you can see through or that's really flimsy. You want to make sure it's professional and stands out and looks nice. You can use the same cover letter format for multiple different jobs if you're applying for multiple jobs, but you want to make sure that you change each one to match the position. There's nothing worse than receiving a cover letter and a resume that was obviously previously used to apply for another position and it doesn't match the position that you're applying for. So make sure you're diligent in making sure that you're updating your resume and your cover letters to ensure that you're applying for the right position. When you're creating your cover letter, make sure that you address it to a specific person. Do your research. Make sure that you know who you're addressing this to. Instead of using whom it may concern or a generic heading, get online, do your research, find out who is the head of that department or who the hiring manager is, and make sure you address it to that specific person. You want to state why you're interested in the position and elaborate on any work experience related to that position and any skills that you hold that is related specifically to that position. And show your personality. What are you passionate about when it comes to work? What makes this position interesting to you? Emphasize any involvement in leadership or any leadership skills that you have in the cover letter just to grab some attention, and make sure you covered all of the required qualifications quickly in your cover letter. Make sure you highlight them and include those specifically in your resume. Your cover letter form and content should be, again, we talked about it a little bit, but use that same heading on your resume. When you're addressing the person, use the date, the contact person, and say, "Dear whoever it is." On that first paragraph, you want to introduce yourself, to let them know where and how you heard about the position and why you're applying. And like I said, research the employer and just add something specific about why you think you're a good fit or why you're interested in that particular position. In the next paragraph or two, explain your education and experience in detail. With expression, kind of this is where you highlight who you are and why you're a good fit and relate it to that position specifically. Make sure you know what you're talking about and how your skills would be relevant to this position. And in your closing paragraph, you want to refer back to your resume, state final details such as, maybe something specifically special about that position, that you're willing to work on weekends or can travel, or you look forward to working remotely, or whatever the case may be. And that you look forward to hearing back from them and thank them for their time and consideration. In the ending, just write something very generic and simple. Sincerely, best regards, your name, signed and then typed as well. So here's an example of a resume. You can see that all the pertinent information is in the heading. Here's a good summary statement. And this highlights her skills. So this would be more of a profile summary statement. More than 13 years of experience as a real estate paralegal and contracts manager for nationally recognized law firms and wireless communications companies. And then she lists here, instead of doing her education first, she lists some of her specific skills, her leadership involvement, and she lists her work history here. We have education, and she lists some of her additional skills that would be relevant to this position. You can see how it's organized well, it's using simple font, it's easy to read, and it's very eye-catching. This one, in my opinion, is even more eye-catching. You have a little bit of color contrast that highlights the summary of qualification experience and their highlight or their headline. It's in big, bold font, so you can see exactly who that is and how to contact them. Good summary of qualifications statement, and it's outlined very well. You can see the positions that they held, and the company wasn't necessarily highlighted, but the position was highlighted, and that makes it very easy to see what type of position this person has held. Very simple and easy to read. So once you have your resume prepared, things are changing a lot. The majority of the time, technology is involved when you are creating your resume. So make sure that when you're writing your resume, make sure you're prepared for what we call ATS, or applicant tracking systems. Most employers have some sort of automated application process. And so it's important to understand what their system does and how to game it, so to speak. You want to do whatever you can to make sure you follow their processes and get that resume and application uploaded into their platform or their ATS appropriately, so it's readable and it's just as clean as when you're looking at it. Make sure your resume is reworded each time, so keywords for the job openings match any words in your resume as much as possible. It kind of picks up the algorithms much more, and especially if you're applying for several different positions on Indeed, or you put your resume out there on Indeed and say that you're looking for a position. the more keywords you use towards your strengths and the positions that you held, the more it's going to find positions that are much more aligned with perhaps your experience. There are several different types of systems and recruitment sites. There's LinkedIn, ZipRecruiter, Indeed, Career Builder, Bamboo HR, Zoho, Workable, all kinds of different systems that employers are using. So you want to pay attention to how you want to get a good understanding of how those systems work so you can apply appropriately. Part of that is understanding what type of document that platform requires, whether it's Word, Google Docs, Pages, a PDF. Almost always the system will accept PDF, and Word is a pretty popular one as well. Uploading documents for application submission. What do you need? You're going to need your resume, your cover letter, and any additional supporting documents, whether it's whether they're asking for upfront references, or you have a special certification or anything like that you want to include. More than likely, you'll have to upload each separately, but again, it depends on the platform that person is using. So you'll have to kind of pay attention and understand the platform. Again, check compatibility requirements. Will it accept a PDF? Will it accept Word? Will it accept Google Docs? Just make sure your documents are in the correct format. Sometimes the position that you're applying for doesn't necessarily put you through a formal application process, nor does it accept resumes. So you'll have to understand the website and understand the files and attachments that you need. It's important to review for consistency. It's rare that your scans upload perfect, especially if there's like autofill. So you want to make sure you go back through and check all of the boxes, so to speak, and make sure that all the information is in the right fields and everything's spelled correctly. Just make sure you submit according to how they're instructed to do so. Otherwise, on the other end, the side that the employer sees, it may not be readable, or they might not be able to understand the information that you've submitted. There's a few different ways to upload resumes. There's manual entry. We still see some employers where it's required by the applicant to manually input all of your information, background, and education. This is not the most prevalent approach these days. Often things are much more automated, but there's still some systems out there where you have to individually and manually enter in all that information. And again, just be careful that you're paying attention to grammar and spelling, and everything's being put into the right fields and all of that. Then oftentimes you'll have an employer who simply asks you to upload your resume as an attachment or email it with any of your accompanying documents. Make sure that, again, your resume is in the correct format in order for the platform to accept that upload. There's also the autofill, like we were just talking about a minute ago. Sometimes the platform takes all the information and tries to autofill it based on whatever you submitted in your resume or previous information. Oftentimes that information is incorrect, so you want to check and review every field for consistency and accuracy as much as you can. So Again, when it comes to technology, just make sure that you're able to identify what system is being used for the job you're applying for. Review your information for errors. Don't submit your information with known errors. Do as much as you can to be as thorough and consistent as possible. And building pre-ready resumes and profiles with employment sites and systems. You can do that, but it's very generic and it's not probably going to catch the attention of most employers. So you want to be careful about that. So today we've talked a little bit about what you can do to make your resume as eye-catching and appealing as possible. You want to make sure you use those 5 P's and make sure it's perfect. You're paying attention to your proofreading. You're paying attention to the paper or the system that you're using. You want to make sure that you're highlighting you and your skills and your personality and the jobs that you've held. You really want to make sure you create a good resume because, like I said, employers give you about 7 seconds to really tell your story, and you want to make it as eye-catching and appealing as possible. Good luck building and creating your resume, and take the time to do it because it will definitely be time well spent. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.